Great. Great. So welcome everyone. So glad to see so many of you here and on this lovely Wednesday. It's actually pretty good weather in New York City. So I'm hoping you guys are also all having good weather. Oh, I see Patricia. Hi, Patricia. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have two amazing presenters, and I'll give you a little bit of a backstory about why we invited them to come speak. But just before we get into all of that, I just wanted to introduce myself to the folks who do not know me. So my name is Sonali. I'm the founder of Petminded, and we are a community for dog lovers, dog parents, dog experts, people like you who are dog obsessed, dog nerds, essentially. I could have just said that. And we offer chats like this, and we also have a community where we continue these types of conversations, and we take courses and just generally nerd out on everything about dogs. I did have some slides on all of this, but we'll just run through this. The most important thing to know for today is that I will be the facilitator. So if you have any problems during this chat, you can message me. And if it's a technical issue or something else, just let me know. If there is a question you want to pose, but you want to pose it anonymously, you can also private message me and I will read it out on your behalf. I won't call you out. So if there is something that is bugging you about dog training, please don't hesitate to ask. And then last but not least, our presenters are, they've graciously offered their time today, and we're really grateful for that. So we will try to stick to our 1 hour time frame. So we will be ending at the top of the hour, but we'll make sure that everyone has plenty of time to answer questions. I will send out a recording of this chat, and I can share both Vallie and Dawn's Instagram handles so that you can continue to follow them and continue to learn more about these topics. And I think that's it from an admin standpoint. So I shall stop sharing my screen. And I just wanted to encourage everyone, if you have a puppy or, well, any kind of dog who is present with you today, and if you want to show us your dog and tell us a little bit about why you joined before we turn it over to our speakers. Anyone want to show puppy?
Dawn, why don't you show your puppy?
I got an old puppy right here with me.
Oh,
Hi.
what's your dog's name, Dawn?
So I'm just fostering him right now. This is Cyrano. He's a 16-year-old chubby little donut, and yeah, he's just been with me for the last 10 days or so. And
oh my gosh, adorable.
Not much longer, we're just taking care of him. Real sweetheart.
That's great. I think I saw Christina sharing her pup.
Turn on my camera to show you guys Mitty. This is Mitty. She is 8 years old, and we've been working with a positive trainer, but I'm always curious to learn more about different training methods and just learn more about dogs in general and see how I can help her.
Thanks, Christina. Caitlin, do you want to tell us who you have there?
Yeah, so this is Reaver. I'm actually here because I made a new friend over the internet, which was Dawn, which is one of the presenters. So I wanted to come here and support him.
Hi, Caitlin.
And hi, Dawn. Reaver is my demo dog because I'm also an animal trainer. And, we've been on TikTok recently and seeing a lot of stuff online. So the topic also looked really interesting to hear other people's viewpoints on stuff.
Nice to see you here.
Nice to see you.
Very cool. Tina, do you have the foster pup with you? Do you want to show off Lucy?
Yeah, so that's Lucy having a snooze over there. We're just fostering her also. So she's up for adoption. Some interest in her, but she's a shepherd mix 1-year-old, which, as you know, is completely the opposite of what we used to have. And she actually needs a lot more training than Willis needed. So we are working very hard with her on making sure that she's the best dog she is for adoption.
I love her.
She looks like a baby husk.
We kind of
Yeah, she's like a baby fox. Some people say like Basenji even. She's got some Basenji vibes. But shepherd mix is the official that they gave us. She's a lot smaller than your average shepherd, I would say. There's a shepherd puppy in our building, like a German shepherd, and she's about the same size as that little guy. Yeah.
Thank you for
Pretty good.
sharing. It's so great to see you fostering. It's really awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks,
all
Nina.
thanks to you. So you send me off to Patricia, and what do you know? The next week I got a foster dog.
That's amazing. Just for
Yeah.
context, Nina is a member of the Petminded community, and her dog Willis passed away recently, but she's back at it, taking care of other pups, being awesome. Kate, Alexander, do you want to share your pups, and then we'll actually get things moving right after?
Sure. Sorry, Alexander's my husband's name, and I never remember to change. I never remember to change it. Anyways, I'm Shalina. This is my dog Indy.
Oh,
Very
Yeah.
cute.
Indy
I
does-
just woke.
yeah.
I
Are
just
you
woke her
on
up from a nap. What was that?
those tricks? Or do
That's
you
it. Indy does tricks. There she
oh,
is.
right on.
Mhm.
There she is in the fur. Anyways, nice to meet all of you.
Thanks for joining. Hey,
And
Kate.
This
all
is
you.
this is Milo, my Labradoodle, who's 11. And he just recently got a little brother who is a year. He's a mutt. And he's very scared of the whole world, but he's getting better. So we're just here to learn. We're working with a trainer and a vet behaviorist, but yeah, just trying to arm myself with as much knowledge as possible.
Nice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining today. I think one of the greatest things about Zoom is that we get to meet people from all over, and then of course meet everyone's pups at the same time and learn what brings them to these events. So thanks, guys. I know we actually have Steph here from the Philippines, just so you guys know how excited everyone is for your event. But going back to the topic of our event today, I invited Vallie and Dawn because recently there's been a lot of conversation around dog training. And it might just be because now we have TikTok and Instagram and all of this stuff to our disposal. Maybe these conversations were already happening, but there's both the good and the bad of it, right? We have a lot more information, but there's a lot more misinformation. And one of the things that we try to do at Petminded is to really point our community and our audience to the right sources of information. And I've been following Vallie's account for a while, and I love it. I think she does such a great job advocating for animals, breaking down difficult concepts. And I just also really admire how she's not afraid to take a stance, which I know many of us, sometimes we see something and we're too afraid to speak up. And I think she really models that behavior. So Vallie, thank you so much for being here today. And we also have Don here, and he is a good friend of Vallie's. I think I've caught one of their fun IG lives before, but check out his account as well. Some really good training stuff and just two all-around great people. But actually, I would love it if you guys would just take a moment each to tell us about yourself, your background, and how you got into being Instagram influencers. If that's what we're calling it. Just a joke.
Go for it,
Vallie,
Vallie.
do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Thanks for the really kind words, Sonali. That was really lovely to hear that you've enjoyed my account. And yeah, I do a lot of advocacy around dog training, so positive reinforcement and force-free and fear-free dog training. I have a PhD in geography from the University of Guelph, and I focused on human African wild dog conflict and conservation in Botswana in Southern Africa. And African wild dogs are one of the most endangered large carnivores in sub-Saharan Africa. They're very similar socially and behaviorally to wolves. So a lot of times they're called the wolves of Africa, even though they're not related to wolves. But they have very similar social structures. So I learned a lot about African wild dogs when I was in Botswana, and I worked with a lot of conservation biologists. So I draw a lot of my knowledge from you know, the years of like reading about, you know, not only African wild dogs, but large carnivores, in particular, wild canids, you know, to inform dog behavior as well, because there are a lot of misconceptions around dogs and their behaviors being similar to wolves. And that really, you know, has informed the way that people train their dogs. So I got into dog training, not so much with my old dog Ghost, who recently also passed away. So whoever lost their dog recently, I'm really sorry. And I totally feel for you. But Ghost was kind of, I didn't know anything about dog training with Ghost, and he was very shut down. He came alive in the forest, and I didn't know that what we were doing were decompression walks. So now that I look back, and we went to the forest every single day, because that was kind of the time where he really kind of came out of his shell. And I think those really, really helped with him, you know, not being so shut down. And a few years ago, we got Husks, who, if you follow me, is featured most of the time on my Instagram. And Husk is really the one who started me on my path to positive reinforcement dog training. I started out like not knowing much about dog training. He was totally wild, like a teenager. I started following a balance trainer who was very R+ leaning, but still balanced, and used prongs and e-collars. So I, you know, tried the e-collar on Husk for about a month for recall, and I felt really horrible every time I was using it. And I was like, this is super weird. Like, I do not like this. And so I went to a talk by Cindy Peacock, and she is a dog trainer based out of Calgary, but she also trains a grizzly bear. And then she clicker trains this grizzly bear, Boo, at Kicking Horse Mountain. And she was doing recalls with him and cooperative care. And I was like, whoa, like it like blew my mind. So I was like, if we can do this with a grizzly bear, like, why can't I do this with my dog? So I started working with Cindy and shadowing her, and shadowed some other trainers. And I got my Karen Pryor Academy comprehensive dog training certificate just to advance my own knowledge. I don't take clients. It was just for fun, because I just really wanted to learn. And ever since then, I started the account, and I've been learning more and more and going to conferences. Luckily, they're all online, which is kind of great. But yeah, and just learning as much as I can and absorbing so much knowledge, reading books, reading peer-reviewed science, and learning from like really great trainers like Dawn and other folks on Instagram. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And on that note, Dawn, go ahead.
I'm learning, I'm still learning about you. There's details in there. I was like, I didn't know that was how that worked. That's so great. You're so good, Vallie.
Oh, thanks, Dawn. You're so good.
So my story with dogs goes like, you know, back to childhood and dogs and whatnot. Like I think a lot of us probably had experiences like that. But I really strayed from my interest in working with animals. That was really strong as a kid. I worked in veterinary clinics and had all sorts of critters around home, and was never really that interested in dog training, but was just really fascinated with animals. And it all got really reinvigorated when I went traveling up in the Yukon about 12 years ago, and like took care of a guy's dog on a temporary basis and eventually adopted him. And it completely changed my life and rerouted this whole sort of track I was on. And I was like, oh, actually having dogs in my life is incredible, and brought like a lot of joy and a lot of life and inspiration to me. There's a bunch of steps in the story, but eventually I would work at some dog sledding outfits and spend just months on end in the winter with hundreds of dogs. And I think that still is a foundation of experience that I can draw on, just having that much like hands-on, watching, observing, interacting with so many dogs. But eventually led me to shelter work, which is where I started to become really fascinated with like problematic behavior, really challenging issues, dogs that were difficult to handle. And I'm really reluctant I was excited by it, but I get a little reluctant about that because, you know, sometimes us guys can feel like cowboys or something with challenging dogs like that. And it still to this day, I think working with dogs who are even a little bit scary is something that I'm actually quite quite engaged in and fascinated. And so I try to resist the sort of excitement around that. But I started just got really interested in dogs that were difficult to work with. And that's when I started learning about training. And similarly to Vallie, the first training information I had access to was more of the balanced stuff. This was all like peak Cesar Millan time, and I was drinking that Kool-Aid. And it was a book by Dr. Patricia McConnell, The Other End of the Leash, that I read, and it just completely, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is a whole like paradigm shift for me. And I'm still learning every day, but that was a bit of a milestone. And I think from that point on, I was forever gravitating towards the sort of R+ persuasion and learning more and more, eventually studying with the Karen Pryor Academy and following that up with other courses to further my education. But yeah, it's been 5 years now. I run my own business, just doing one-on-one behavior modification sessions, helping people sort of resolve issues and live better lives with their dogs in the city.
I recommend you all the
Amazing.
time.
Thank you. We have folks in the chat, you know, you have some big fans out there, Vallie and Dawn. People love your lives. And Steph says that she often laughs at her old self and how she drank a bottle of that same Kool-Aid 9 years ago. And I'll read off the other comments later, but I kind of want to jump in because you already sort of referenced what was going to be my next question. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, could you each define for us some of the popular forms of dog training, how you, on a very high level, you know, what is the difference between balanced and R+? Because I think for pet parents, this can be a really confusing topic. And there's a lot of self-proclaimed experts who, like, you know, you'll see posts and are just like, this is completely different from what the other person said. So, Dawn, do you want to take it away, or?
Sure, yeah, I can lead this. So I think so initially, like, these are all like labels, and so they're great for like marketing and great for like in a condensed way, like communicating from one person to the other that like this is how I would describe my practice. But that's up for interpretation sometimes, depending on who you talk to. But I do feel like the force-free / positive reinforcement, positive reinforcement based, evidence based, et cetera. These are all labels, but they are easier to define in my mind because there's a few more constraints around what it means to sort of identify and practice under that sort of label. And typically it means that we try to just do our best to design training plans that avoid the use of aversive experiences for the dog. And that means that we are not using things that punish behaviors that they do by making them feel bad, whether like emotionally or physically. We try to create situations so that they choose the things that we like and so that we can reinforce those and see those behaviors increase. So I think the definition is a little tighter because there are some parameters there. When it comes to defining balance, I find people define it in a lot of different ways. And I think there's a lot of conversations in that community going on about how people are kind of trying to differentiate themselves from some people on the spectrum between other people in the spectrum. But in general, I think the most common sort of tagline to like balanced training is that they utilize all of the quadrants of operant conditioning, which just means that they are willing to use uncomfortable experiences to punish behaviors and decrease them. I've got a lot more feelings about it than that, but I think that's, if I'll try to be a little like objective and sort of lead it there. I think there are more like contemporary balance trainers that do embody a lot of philosophies that are more common in the force-free community, but still want to like leave the door open for being able to use punishment for certain things. And then there's a whole spectrum, and it goes further, and it gets kind of ugly, and it's pretty like old school. There's a lot of stuff that I think we are just decades beyond that's still lingering around. And sometimes those people will call themselves balanced too. So it can be tough on the consumer side because somebody could call themselves balanced and really fit anywhere on a large spectrum.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like the way that I see positive reinforcement / force-free / fear-free would be more like not so much the tools or the way that we train, which is actually like a huge part of it. So often, we would say we're clicker trainers, which, is very much positive reinforcement training, but for me, it's a philosophy, it's a way of living, the way that I live my life with my dogs, and, and making sure that I'm providing, the best life that I can, that is a dog's life. So, meeting their needs, training them in a way that doesn't cause them, anxiety or fear, or using force with them. And I'm not saying that balance trainers don't do this, but balance trainers will use, to a certain extent, depending on what Dawn was saying, like there are people who are on a certain spectrum. Like, yes, I learned a lot in the beginning from a balance trainer who, was R+ leaning. But then you have compulsion based trainers on the other end of the spectrum who, I think are really more likely to use force, more likely to use fear tactics, intimidation, and outdated methods and outdated philosophies and theories, similar to what we would see on TV, where Dawn was saying, like, looking at Cesar Millan, and where he was using these wolf pack theories to inform dog behavior and the way that dogs act. And that's just not, that was debunked years and years ago. So I think for me, like, positive reinforcement training, yes, it is about the tools and like the way that we train, but it's also a kind of like a philosophy and a lifestyle for me. And it informs my relationships with my dogs. My one dog now.
I did want to mention really quick as a side note, everyone, Vallie lost her pup just recently, and I did offer, I thought maybe she would want to move this, but she so graciously agreed to do this. So thank you again.
Well, I did bring Dawn on. I was like, bring Dawn. I need another person there. My brain's a little fuzzy still, but yeah. And Dawn graciously, agreed to be my co-host. So yeah. Does that is a good?
Yeah.
Does anyone have
super
any
helpful? Does anyone have any questions? Steph just said that R+ has informed the way I teach life lessons to my kids. Oh, I love that.
I do really like it as a philosophy, and I think that, like, the more I've learned about it's been focused to dog training, but it really has like a huge influence on the rest of my life. It really is like, you start to, as you train yourself to recognize experiences that like your dog doesn't love, and you start to seek out avenues to get some sort of results that don't involve punishment, you start to really, I think there's a bit of a paradigm shift. And I think this is why it's sometimes a struggle for people to kind of get into the force-free thing, because it is really like philosophical, and it's a mindset sort of thing where you're now kind of committing to like challenging yourself to observe and recognize when things are like aversive or punishing, and to say, oh shoot, like that's probably not very cool for you, is it? I wonder if there's a way that I can kind of go about it. So in a way, for me, at least in dog training, and I think in day-to-day life, there's something in that is the pursuit of like identifying and minimizing like aversive, punishing, shitty feeling experiences. If I'm trying to like influence another being's behavior, I should try to recognize when I'm doing that in a way that's not being received very well, and find ways to do it that are like more interesting to that being.
And I also think it's about, like, a lot of positive reinforcement trainers, they really focus on the environment, as opposed to putting the dog, putting all this pressure on the dog. Like, so how can we change the environment so that the behaviors either don't get repeated, or, the environment is as stressful for the dog? And I think that that's a big shift for a lot of people as well, is to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I need to do more work on not putting so much pressure on my dog to behave in a certain way. Rather, how can I make these changes to my dog's environment so that my dog is more comfortable and feels safer? So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've heard trainers talk about training the human. It's really about teaching ourselves how to be with our dogs and how to care for them. Just like we would with human children as well. And I see a few other folks sort of nodding along virtually in the chat with your comments. Folks, I'm going to just ask a few more questions that came in with your registrations, but then afterwards, if you would like to jump in with yours, feel free to use the little button on the bottom that says reactions. It will let you raise a hand. And then I can bring you on stage so you can ask your question. But if you do not feel like coming on stage, I know not everyone wants to be on camera. It is the middle of the week. Just drop your question in the chat. I'll read it off to Vallie and Dawn. So, ooh, we actually have one coming in. So let's take that. Amy asks, this might be a naive question, but why do some automatically think aversive training is better? Because it will allegedly work faster, it's easier. I personally don't know anyone who trains this way, but in general, I think it would be good to know basic talking points behind the positive reinforcements so I can call people out if necessary. Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a big, there's a huge culture around punishment. And I think in a really like, I don't want to call it basic, like in like the, you know, sort of social zeitgeist, sort of like that's basic sort of way. But I think it is basic in that it's a really like very basic response to something that you don't like. You know, like I don't like this. Ugh. Like you shout at it, you push it away, you do a thing. It's like, I think it's a really fundamental sort of knee-jerk response to a thing that you just don't like. And I think we've seen that historically with the way we treat animals, with the way we raise ourselves, you know, children. I think the sort of auto knee-jerk response is often more aligned with sort of punishing, and it is like effective depending on how you define effective. It'll often like stop something that you don't like, and that's reinforcing for me, right? Like if I shout at you to stop and you stop, that works for me and feeds my needs. So I think when you're trying to like identify these things and call them out, I think it's definitely worthwhile to acknowledge that like it's a big thing, and people don't challenge this way of thinking very often. And so I think while advocating for this sort of stuff, you're probably best to be a bit mentally prepared for some backlash, because a lot of people think you are like absolutely nuts for you know, challenging that sort of way of thinking, because it's so sort of fundamental in a lot of ways. But I think as soon as we start to think more critically about like how we care for our dogs, how we train them to do things, and I'll go further to like how we, you know, care for our children and raise them and whatnot. I think that there's some real parallels there, and dog training tends to kind of like lag a lot of parenting trends. That as soon as we start thinking more thoughtfully, more critically, and as soon as we start prioritizing like the care and well-being of the individual we're interacting with, and take that responsibility on ourselves and stop putting it on them, all of a sudden we have to realize that there's so many things that can have negative consequences and followed, and we should avoid those things. And there are wonderful, like sophisticated ways of doing the things that we want to do that actually like boost their well-being while also achieving the goals we're trying to achieve. It just takes a little more know-how, a little more like education, like knowing what are good strategies to approach things with. I feel like I've lost track of the question, but,
I went back and read it. I was like, what's the question again? But I got you, Amy. I found it.
Yeah, go for it. Vallie, take over.
I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing that happens with aversive training. First, I think that just to kind of echo what Dawn was saying, that, you know, we live in very much of a punishment-based culture. Punishment is used every day. I mean, we use positive reinforcement, we use all the operant conditioning in our everyday lives. It's behavior, it's what drives behavior. So I think we put this, you know, kind of pressure on animals to understand these concepts of acting appropriately, being held accountable, respecting us. And these are concepts, you know, human concepts that dogs just don't understand. I think that has been largely also driven by huge marketing campaigns around this type of training. You know, Cesar Millan was huge, as still is huge. Canine Intervention on Netflix. I think there's just a lot of this type of training, and I wouldn't necessarily call it balanced. I'd probably call it more compulsion-based training that is very accessible to folks, and it's really difficult to weed through all of that information that's out there. And at the end of the day, you know, punishment aversive training just works really quickly. I mean, punishment works really fast. Just as an example, you know, the other day my friend was supposed to come over and she called me and her car got towed. And she was like, I will never park my car in an area where I don't look at the signs again. And I was like, yeah, because punishment works really fast, you know. But the follow to that is also anxiety, right, around parking next time, being more vigilant about signage, you know, and to translate that to dogs, you know, punishment works really, really fast and really, really quickly. And a lot of times, you know, a lot of dog parents who just get dogs, you know, are trying to focus on all of these like behaviors that are coming out. I think they see a lot of, you know, shut down dogs are being said that these are calm dogs. And so I think there's a lot of like these micro kind of behaviors that, you know, the average pet owner may not necessarily be able to recognize in a dog, and body language they may not be able to recognize. And, you know, when you have an expert on TV, like, why would this guy be on TV if he's, you know, harming dogs? Well, he must be right. So I think there's this combination of like marketing and then also, you know, the popularity of these types of trainers. And I was talking with, Renee from Bravo Dog Training, who everyone should follow, you know, she was saying that positive reinforcement trainers tend to spend money on education, and the kind of uneducated trainers who do this, you know, more compulsion based and balanced trainers tend to spend their money on marketing. And I think that that's really, really telling. So, I mean, I don't get ads for positive reinforcement training on my Instagram. I get ads for balance training. So I think there's kind of this like mishmash of things that are going on. So yeah. And I don't know, calling people out. I saw someone say that, you know, people might not be so R plus trainers are not R plus when trying to advocate for force-free training. And I think that that's calling people out. It can be really hard not to do it. I think it's a very emotional topic, and it's a really, you know, people are very passionate. And I think it's just trying to do it in a good way, but it can get really out of hand, especially on the internet. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really great. I'm going to follow up with a question from Kayla, which I think is probably a situation people find themselves in and maybe go to a balance trainer for. She asked, how do you handle situations when your dog goes over threshold? I hear many say that punishment is needed to teach the dog that a behavior is off the table. Asking for a friend. And her example is also lunging at a human.
Kayla's a good friend of ours.
No, but thank you for asking.
Yeah,
great.
And everyone should also follow Kayla at the Toby Project, because Kayla has come a very, very long way in actually quite a short amount of time with Toby, and he's doing amazing. And it's all positive reinforcement training and behavior modification using non-punitive methods. Don, why don't you go first and talk about your area?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I make a little bit of a division. I think, you know, people will sometimes, there's sort of a talking point that like, there's no such thing as like purely positive, which is like whatever, we could unpack that, it'd take a little bit, but there's some truth to it, but it's a bit of a straw man. So there's like reinforcement and punishment just like lurking in our environment all of the time, and there's no way that you can conduct yourself just like perfectly within like a certain ideology, or at least trying to like work within you know, exactly within positive reinforcement. I like to kind of make some categories that help me to like make sense of exactly like my engagement. And so as a professional dog trainer, if I know that this is the issue and this is the result that I'm like hoping to get, I'm going to approach it in a way that centers positive reinforcement. That's going to be the consequence. It's always going to be the consequence. And I'm going to manage situations in order to accommodate that consequence. But there's so many things that happen in the real world that aren't managed in the way that allow me to utilize that consequence. And it's just reality. So working with a reactive dog, I was just with one actually just before we came here, and as soon as you do your best to set up the circumstance. I want you to see this dog from a distance. I want you to look at it. When you look back at me, you'll get a tasty treat. This is fantastic. R+, hooray. But we can't just perfectly manage every situation in the real world. Something's going to sneak up on you. You're going to miscalculate or whatever it is. And all of a sudden you've got a dog who's lunging on the leash. And you're like, well, what do you do now? How do I convince you with treats or some other thing that you like to get out of here? Because right now you're just thriving on this reinforcement of yelling at this other dog. And I need to get you out of there. And in those situations, I think about it differently. To me, this switches into like a damage control situation. And what I think at that point, if I could rewind and do it again, I'd adjust a little bit earlier and we wouldn't be here. But I'm here now. So what do I do? And what I want to do is minimize the duration of that event. If this dog is going to bark at this dog for 10 seconds or 60 seconds or 2 minutes, I'd much rather they bark at this dog for 10 seconds. And so I'm going to try to get the dog out of that situation. And I'm going to try to do that in as gentle a way as possible. So I'm not like picking them up and, throwing them away. I'll try to use some treats. But I'm probably going to use some leash pressure. I might, for some dogs, they're like, I'm going to kill you. And you're like, no, you're going to hide behind this car with me. And it's going to mean, kind of hauling them out of there. And hauling is, a bit of a, maybe not the descriptor I want to use, but I'm going to get you out of that situation, because right now, like, your adrenaline is just climbing. This is like accelerating. We're just getting into a worse and worse situation. And I need to get you out of here. And so that, I just don't think that violates, I don't lose my like force-free dog training badge for that. Because what I'm trying to do is take good care of this dog. And I'm trying to teach them that dogs aren't the threat that they perceive them to be as best as I can. But if we end up in a situation, I'm not going to stand there and just let them lose their minds until they turn around for a treat. The best thing that can be done for that dog at that point is to reduce the duration of that event. And I will physically move them out of there if they need to, but I'm going to try to approach that in the least invasive way possible and graduate to slightly more like invasive measures to get that dog out of there, because I can't have them sitting there climbing the ladder, getting more agitated at those experiences. And I just don't think that is, I don't think that violates my R+ planning. It's just a way of managing a situation. And I think about it as damage control. Sometimes shit hits the fan and you have to make the best of that. And so that's, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. I think that's the best thing to do in those sorts of situations.
Yeah, like Husk can be reactive. So when he does go over a threshold, my first thing is space. I just like turn around and like run away. And I think that, I think a lot of the whole thing around punishment, I think there's a couple different things to consider when we hear, punish the unwanted behavior and it won't get repeated. I think number one, having a reactive dog can be very embarrassing for people. I've been in situations where I've been totally embarrassed by Husk, going wild and nuts and, everyone's staring at me and people are putting this pressure on me to control my dog and all that stuff. I've definitely gotten better at that, mostly because I just don't care anymore what people think. And secondly, I've learned to manage and, work on Husk's reactivity. The second thing is, when you have to remember that that reactivity is driven by emotions. And when you're adding something negative to a dog who is already having a negative experience, the reactivity can actually get worse. it might stop that behavior in that moment, but that association that that dog has just made with this dog being, or whatever person, and maybe Kayla's case, stranger danger, dog, whatever it is they're reacting to, is not only scary, but now you've added this other layer of punishment and negativity where, if you're leash correcting or hitting or yelling at the dog, now all of a sudden you've got another layer of negative association that's been made with that particular thing that they're reacting to. So I think being, having these tools, like where at that point, like Dawn was saying, you're just trying to manage because your dog has gone over a threshold and you were in a situation where you weren't able to manage the situation to have your dog under threshold, like do a treat, scatter, run. Like I have literally run into people's driveways, or trying not to trample gardens and stuff like that. But I've crossed the street, I've turned around, and just, really trying to be compassionate toward your dog, that they're not trying to embarrass you. They're not trying to, make things worse or whatever it is that you're feeling in that moment. Like, don't think about what other people are thinking about, that they're looking at you, and just try to remember the tools that you've learned, whether that's management, running away, whatever it is that you need to do in that situation. And then you kind of just, have that moment. I've definitely cried. I've definitely been embarrassed. I've definitely walked away being frustrated, for sure. But, taking some time to kind of decompress and letting your dog decompress. And just, remembering what you've learned in terms of the reactivity. And if you are struggling, try to find a trainer, a positive reinforcement trainer who's going to address the underlying emotions rather than, just stopping that behavior right away. So.
And I think that's a huge, I think there is a nugget in there that you touched on that is the center of so much misunderstanding, at least in the conversations I see online. And it's the misunderstanding about technically about the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and people really start blurring them, and they're similar in so many ways that the Venn diagram of the two of them are heavily overlapped, but there are differences. And to think about, I feel very sort of classical first, which is thinking about what are the involuntary responses the dog has, and within involuntary responses are emotional responses. Because I really deeply believe that if we have a dog that has generally positive emotional responses to a lot of things in the world, is oftentimes not the dog that we're struggling with a ton of behavior issues. They generally have a good perception of the world. They feel good about things. And so it's always my first approach with a lot of behavior issues is to make sure, or ask myself these questions to assess, does this dog feel comfortable in the world? Does this dog feel comfortable when it sees another dog? Does this dog feel comfortable when it sees a cyclist, et cetera, et cetera? Because I don't think it's even appropriate to jump right into a specific skill for that circumstance, because the first thing we should be doing is making sure that they feel comfortable in that circumstance. And oftentimes once they feel comfortable, the skills just come along really easy in a lot of cases. But people will get upset about using food or other forms of reinforcement, even love and affection and caring in certain circumstances, because they're afraid that they're going to increase that behavior, which is very operant way of thinking about things. And really, if you have a distressed dog and caring for them settles them down, you should do that. If they're upset about something, but happy to gobble up some delicious treats, feed them treats. That can often just help them to feel better. And I think that is fundamentally more important than the skills themselves. I've fed plenty of dogs while they're behaving in ways that I don't love and had great success because they feel better, and then we see a reduction in the behavior. And sometimes some nuisance behaviors have piggybacked along, but those are very easy to address once the dog feels more comfortable in those circumstances. So it's not there's a lot of confusion around that, and rightly so, because it's not simple to parse out where those overlap and where they separate. It's a conversation I'm really interested in and continue to try to explore and think about so that I can communicate it better. But I do think it's the kernel of a lot of misunderstanding and dog training stuff on social media.
Pavlov is always on
super
your
helpful. Yes, And actually, I was hoping, since we did talk about classical conditioning, for those in the room who don't know what operant conditioning is, if you could just quickly describe that too.
I think the simple way to describe it is to think about voluntary and involuntary behaviors. So if we can increase the likelihood of those things happening in other beings, in our dogs, but they operate slightly different. So like involuntary things, really obvious, like physical ones, are like the way your pupils dilate, or your you get goosebumps, you shiver when you're cold. Like these are things that you can't like make yourself do. Your body does them. Now we can induce those sort of states. Like I can shine a light at you and make your pupils do those things. I can put you in a walk-in freezer and you'll shiver. You can make these sorts of things happen, but also like emotional responses are in there. And I think that's what's really important on the dog training side of things. You just don't have control about those. This is your body responding to things before you're like consciously choosing to do anything about it. And then operant has a lot more to do with consequences. Is when you behave in a certain way and something happens that you like, and you're like, I'm going to do more of that. And sometimes it's something you like is acquiring something that you want. And sometimes something you like is escaping something that you don't want. That's really what like all of our behavior kind of comes down to. Every single thing we do is in one way or another an expression of getting something that we do want or getting away from something that we don't want. And I think that's a big thing with like the R+ motive, like style of training, is that we're trying to make sure that all the behavior is motivated by acquiring something that we like, because the alternative is to find relief, which can be fantastic in so many ways. But to find relief, you need to be escaping something. And so if we're going to use other sort of more punitive methods, we need to introduce something kind of crappy so that our dog can find relief in escaping it. So those are getting good stuff and escaping bad stuff is more of the operant variety. And then all of the other things that our body does in the brain, these immediate responses, physical reactions, emotional responses, are all more of the classical sort of variety of things.
Yeah, like I kind of think of like classical conditioning as like associations and operant as consequences to increase or decrease behavior. So you think of Pavlov, as classical conditioning, ring the bell, the dog salivates. So that's your like, the bell now has been associated with the bringing of food. Whereas, operant conditioning would be, for example, your dog sits, you give your dog a treat, the dog is going to start doing that sit behavior again because they've associated, that they know that they're getting a treat every time they do this behavior. So when people say, oh, positive reinforcement works by definition, that's exactly what it means. It means positive means adding, reinforcement means increasing behavior. So if you look at the quadrants, I say quadrants because they're not really quadrants, but we tend to use positive reinforcement in terms of adding. So positive reinforcement behavior gets repeated and increasing. You have negative reinforcement. So same thing, you take something away and the behavior gets repeated. Positive punishment, you add something aversive, the behavior gets increased. Looking at Dawn, like, am I doing this right? And then negative punishment, you take something away and the behavior decreases. So you take something aversive away and the behavior decreases. So if you think about like a e-collar, so if you add a stimulation or a shock to a dog to stop a behavior, that would be positive punishment. You smack a dog on the nose, to make it, stop counter surfing, that's positive punishment. For example, an e-collar, when you're using it to create that relief, so you would take the shock away in order to decrease a behavior or increase a behavior, depending on what you're trying to do. So there's all these different ways of the 4 kind of quadrants. And Dawn and I talk about negative reinforcement like probably once a month.
I love it.
There is a very interesting question in the chat from Caitlin. And since you mentioned e-collars, I'm going to ask it. And then folks who posted in the chat, I am like scrolling through to sort of combine your questions so we get to them. But Caitlin wants to know, in your opinion, can a force-free trainer use an electronic shock collar in a non-aversive way?
Yeah, like I think no. But people will argue that they can. And I think if you want to be like super hair splitty about it, like there's an angle, but it's like, it's minute and it's impossible to confirm because it ultimately comes down to the dog's experience. So I have an internet friend who has a deaf dog who uses a vibration collar, and just that can be kind of controversial sometimes in the R+ community. And people would say, you know what, it doesn't deliver any like electric stim, it just shakes, right? And now that could be aversive. That could be something that a dog finds unpleasant, and you can use whatever adjective, you know, scary or uncomfortable or weird, whatever. We don't know. They would get to describe it. They could find it aversive. They could find it to be something that they don't like. Alternatively, if you were to vibe the collar and dish out a bunch of awesome treats, it could be that vibration is an experience that they have a positive emotional response to, and lets them know that when they feel that, they could check in with their person and get some amazing treats. I know this person is a force-free trainer, and they're very aware of like the nuance of it, and they're very aware of how a vibration collar alone can be aversive and how it's murky trying to say that it is or isn't, because it ultimately comes down to the dog's experience. But with that great level of caution, she's done this with her deaf dog, and I don't know, I've seen videos of her recalls and they look like amazing. They look joyous, like the dog like pivots and runs back with this big smile on its face. And I think she's done it successfully. But I think without so much caution, I think it could be aversive. You know, that dog could be turning around excited to get those treats, but sometimes that excitement to get those treats doesn't look too different from the relief of escaping the scary thing, you know. And so relief is a good feeling, but it's contingent on escaping something, and which is there's also, you know, some negative feelings in there. So people will sometimes argue that same angle with e-collars, saying that the electrical stimulation is so low that it's almost neutral, and that when it's paired with treats, it actually becomes a cue to return. And like, if I break my brain and get, like, I think that could be a possibility in the world, but I would just use a whistle or something else and avoid the possibility of using an aversive. I think once we're kind of getting to that slippery slope of carving out a real niche example of how that could operate in that way, but we can't confirm it, there's so many other options available to you. And I think when people oftentimes want e-collars, they want to be able to stop their dog from chasing a deer or something like that, where now we're definitely using a higher stim, stopping a behavior. It's more of a punishment thing. I think if we're really looking at it as a way of cueing our dog to like a positive reinforcement based recall, there's just a lot of other options, and the e-collar isn't useful. It becomes useful when you can dial it up when it doesn't work. And so I would just take that option off the table.
I'm gonna be like more blunt than Dawn. Dawn was like way more like eloquent. I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Love it.
Because
we don't know.
Just no. But no, Caitlin, I think just by definition, like if we just look at the word like electronic shock collar, it's pretty aversive to me. It sounds aversive. You know, Kayla from the Toby Project is a physiotherapist. She uses, you know, the stim from the devices. I don't know what they are, Kayla. You might want to put it in the chat all the time, you know, and the difference is that we can, number one, we know when these stims are coming in physio. We have a warning system. We can express whether or not verbally very quickly, whether or not we're uncomfortable. And that's just not necessarily the case for the dog, right? Like
Mhm.
I've tried an e-collar on my own neck, and like I tried it on a low stim and it was uncomfortable. And people have like, been like, oh, well, I tried on level 13 and I don't even feel it, and my dog tries it on level, I only use it on level 4 on my dog. And I'm like, well, okay, well, dog's skin's more sensitive. Well, first of all, you're not a dog. Second of all, like a dog's skin is way more thinner and more sensitive. I mean, they can feel a fly on them. There's all these other things, and people have laughed. Like I've had some guy laugh at me being like, well, you tried it on a level 13 and that like was bad. Like you felt that, well, you must be really sensitive. And I'm like, well,
That's a big
this
point
is the
though.
case.
Ultimately,
Right.
it's all subjective. We can't
Yes,
even,
exactly.
all everybody in this group
Mhm.
would experience a level whatever stim, and we would all report a range of
Different,
experiences, right? So pain
Yeah.
and discomfort, people say it's uncomfortable but not painful. There's no way to objectively determine that. It's and that's where I think, we get to like, oh, it's just a vibration color. It's just this, is that there's no actual way for us to determine what it is. And I think when you start to argue, well, what if it's a really low stim? You're like, a really, really mildly uncomfortable stimuli is not as effective as a really awesome treat. Why? Like we could argue that, but ultimately we can lay heavier on motivation through positive reinforcement without any risks. Or we could try to carve out like a really particular argument where like the tiniest little bit of aversive stimuli isn't maybe aversive, nobody can confirm, but also that's like in the lowest level of motivation, whereas you could just go out crazy and do wild, like amazing R+ stuff and not have to worry about fallout or worry about if your dog is feeling good about this or not.
And I think like just kind of like bring it back to the topic of discussion here around ethics. I think ethics involves like doing for dog training is like, what are the best practices and the best methods at this time that are, safe, make your dog feel good. These are sentient beings. They can experience fear. Welfare is not just the absence of suffering anymore. It's, positive, effective states. And I think, is it ethical to put an electrical device around a sentient being's neck when there are better and more ethical and less aversive ways to do this? So I think that's, is this thinking like, is this the most ethical way that I can do this training? And are there other ways? Do they take longer? Maybe,
Right.
but that's, do we have to go through more steps? Like, do it for recall? Do I, start in the house, then in the yard, then, on a short leash, then on a long line, then in an area that's fenced? Yeah, I'm going to do all of those things because that is the most ethical and the most, least invasive. And, we can talk about Lima, but Lima's a bit kind of problematic as well. But, these are the ways that are, to me, the most ethical way to train my dogs. So.
Anything on ethics as well as you could.
Oh, sorry.
I have two things I want to mention. One is we are at the top of the hour, and if you guys don't mind sticking around for a little bit, I'm happy to continue the chat because we do have questions. So maybe we take another 15-ish if that's cool. I know it's dinner time for some folks out here, but the other thing I wanted to ask that was coming up sort of in the chat a little bit is then what are the questions asking ourselves, right, about the ethical piece? Because one really big aspect of all of this is knowing for yourself what feels right, what is ethical, and then you can better advocate for your pet. So there are two examples in the chat. One is around Sarah's a veterinary technician, and she wants to talk a little bit about in that setting, how to use the right techniques to restrain pets. And I believe there was someone else who also wanted to understand similarly, sometimes we're doing things to our pets that they may not like. I know my dog hates having her teeth brushed, but we don't want her to die. And She's already lost a lot of teeth. I'm worried about heart disease. So what are the questions we can be asking ourselves about like doing this in an ethical way that you guys would recommend, or that you guys ask yourselves before doing such activities?
Yeah, that's really good questions. I think a lot of people in the R+ community now are pushing for cooperative care, you know, and consent training. So start button behaviors, and, you know, working with veterinarians who, you know, will let you come to the vet, you know, without making an appointment and just hang around. You know, I always bring treats to the vet. Of course, there are times, you know, where, you know, we've had to do a blood draw or something, or, you know, it's been aversive, like it has been. And, you know, at that point, it's also advocating for your pet, right? Saying, okay, let's take a break. Let's, you know, let's come back another day. You know, can you come to my house and do this, where the dog might be more comfortable. Oh, Cyrano.
Cyrano agrees with you.
Yeah, Cyrano. So, you know, I think there's a lot of, you know, veterinarians who are moving towards fear-free practices, or, you know, how to these visits, or, you know, brushing your dog's teeth, like working towards doing it in a way that is minimally aversive for the dog. So I think, you know, I think there's a huge difference between your dog's like physical health and going to the veterinarian and brushing your dog's teeth, although I think you can do a lot of training with that, and loose leash walking. Right. So I think, you know, you have to be able to kind of figure out the context, you know, like you said, Sonali, like, I mean, you know, teeth problems like that can kill your dog like 3 years earlier than it should. Right. So, yeah. And how, I think it's teaching training for these situations that may be aversive, that you cannot avoid, because you have to go to the vet, you have to get vaccines, you have to, you know, do health checks and everything. But and then in the meantime, you know, looking at cooperative care and start button behavior and working with a fear-free vet is a really good way to kind of start moving toward making these potentially aversive situations less aversive for your dog.
I'm also reminded of Dr. Susan Friedman's like trust account analogy, that is sort of like, let's, if we imagine good experiences being deposits and bad experiences being withdrawals, and appreciating that oftentimes single bad experiences are a little bit more expensive, you know, that maybe if we do 10 positive experiences is sort of worth one negative experience. I think it's a nice way to frame it when we think about the inevitability of some negative experiences. So we should proactively spend our time trying to invest positive experiences in certain contexts, understanding that like, it's hard to get, you know, some dogs do it and it's amazing, but it's hard to get like, not every dog is going to like appreciate a blood draw, right? And so we have to just sort of acknowledge that there are going to be, especially when it comes to like some uncomfortable invasive medical care, some of these things are going to be uncomfortable experiences. But if they have a load of uncomfortable experiences in their life, then those are going to be more impactful. And so if they have a load of great experiences in their life, they're going to be able to weather uncomfortable experiences with a lot more resilience. And so trying to make sure that we're investing in that account so that we're always floating a nice, healthy balance so that we can take those withdrawals when they inevitably sort of arrive in the real world situations, but without ever being in the red, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think resilience is a good word there, is recovering and being resilient. And I think if your dog leads, you know, a life that is, you know, 95%, you know, non-aversive experiences, they're going to be able, and then those few aversive experiences that they have, they're going to be able to recover a lot more quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll throw two easy ones at you while I scroll through the others. where do people find R plus trainers? So there's Christine in Boston, but in general, what is the best way to find someone who has that philosophy embedded in their training practice? Also, how do you verify that? Because, you know, this is not a regulated industry. So what should they be looking for? And similarly, also for fear-free veterinarians, what can people be looking out for when they are looking for a new vet?
Yeah. So it's an unregulated industry, but there's a lot of reputable organizations, and a lot of those reputable organizations have like a find a trainer function. And so, you know, there is, I mean, my quick response to that is I love this blog called Companion Animal Psychology by Dr. Zazie Todd. She's fantastic, such like an advocate, lots of wonderful research, but that blog and her book, anyway, I've got a big crush. She's wonderful, but she has there's a lot of like how to choose a dog trainer articles out there, but even that becomes pretty murky, right? Like who's writing these things? I send Zazie's how to choose a dog trainer article, and she just talks about like why you want to choose this, why you might want to avoid that. There's always like links to research, and she names a ton of organizations that also generally indicate that somebody is going to be abiding by a certain sort of set of rules, if you will. So that is that's the short answer. I mean, we could really pick into like the details of that, but I think we can try to trust organizations that have you know that have defined themselves as being you know advocates of this sort of stuff and supporting people, and if you're certified by them, a lot of times you will lose your certification if you're reported to be violating their guidelines. So I would be looking to organizations and like find a trainer in your area functions that are available on it's a popular function on most of those organizational websites.
Yeah, and a couple of people, Liz and Lorraine, just put up Liz put up the article you were talking about in the chat, and fearfreepets.com will have like fear-free groomers, fear-free veterinarians, fear-free trainers. So that's a good resource as well. I think, you know, Karen Pryor Academy is probably one of the leaders in positive reinforcement training. So, you know, you're getting a good trainer with Karen Pryor Academy graduates. And yeah, I mean, I think it's Brown Dog Coalition on Instagram has a really good post on what to look for in terms of, you know, credentials like CPDTK, you know, stuff like that. But I think for the average like pet owner, there are certain key words that you know may raise some red flags, like balanced, corrections, pack. You know, your dog's a pack animal. Which one did you say, Dawn?
Respect.
Yeah,
Leadership. Words that I love, but I'm like, oh, they're so silly.
Yeah. So I think there are some once you kind of get more immersed into like dog training and seeing who's out there, like there are ways to kind of like understand and pick apart those red flags, and you know, a lot of positive reinforcement trainers will say what they've, you know, their education, they'll put it up on their website. Definitely don't, you know, hire a trainer who's just trained themselves by watching YouTube videos, because that's real. There are trainers out there who do actually put that on the website, and it's pretty embarrassing. Bye, Kayla. Kayla has to go to bed. Because she has to wake up at 5 a.m. to book Toby. But
oh gosh, thank you for coming.
So yeah, I think you know, there are some like keywords that are out there that, you know, can be some red flags when you're picking a trainer. So just be careful and really look and go to their website, go to their Instagram, go to their Facebook, and watch videos and see what they do. Ask them questions. You know, what will you do if my dog makes a mistake? If they say, oh, I'll issue a correction, then you know that they're not going to be potentially the trainer for you if you're not looking for that type of training.
Yep.
So,
thank you. I think it's a response that covers a lot of questions in the chat. So thank you for covering it, both of you, so much in depth. So we do have a few questions. I don't want to play a game of, you know, picking favorites. So I'm going to ask one, I think, again, that hopefully encompasses a lot of mini questions in here. And this question is from Lysuna, who's actually the resident dog scientist for Petminded. So I promise I'm not paying favorites, but she asked this question early on, and I thought that this would be actually a great question to end with. And it's really around, you know, everyone in this room, if you're here, you're probably already sort of on this R+ force-free bandwagon, right? We've already bought into it to some degree, but we are potentially still going to make some mistakes. It's not going to be foolproof, right? And so her question is, gosh, I'm really like, this has been a very long chat today. Lysuna, do you want to unmute and just tell us your question? Because I want to do it justice. You don't have to come on video if you don't want to. Wow, we had so many questions. Maybe she's dropped off too. But essentially, I think her question was really around what kind of mistakes can we avoid, both in doing this type of training with our dogs, but also the conversations that we have with other people, right? Because if you see someone on the street and they're doing something wrong, how do you sort of introduce R+ to them in a way that they may actually listen to you, that could be effective for them? You know, there is this aspect of modeling that behavior, but also in conversation. If you guys have tips on that the crew here can share and spread in the world when they go back off Zoom today.
I have had like mixed reactions with that. Like I've definitely like yelled at people for, you know, leash correcting, like harshly leash correcting their dogs. And we've gotten into it a little bit. And, you know, that's mostly men. So Dawn might have a better way of like dealing with men, but I've also had really good conversations with people. I think, yeah, I think for me, I kind of like fall back on my like Ph.D. quite a bit, especially if someone's telling me that they have to be the alpha or like the dominant. And, you know, so that I think I'm kind of in like this niche like place where I can fall back on that. But I also like am really a very enthusiastic clicker trainer when I am around people who are not using positive reinforcement. Mm-hmm. So I will like click the crap out of Huss and like reinforce the crap out of him. And he is just like looking at me and like walking so nice. And he's a husky, right? So people are like, oh, husky, they're like meant to pull on a harness. So like, I think there's a bit of like that, you know, the modeling as well as like overdoing my like clicker training in front of other people or overdoing my recall, because he's got pretty solid recall. So, you know, doing things, showing people that, you know, I don't need to use aversive tools to train my dog, who is, you know, a working dog. So, yeah, I think, yeah, I kind of use those two angles. Yeah, and I think the biggest, I see her question, what is the biggest training mistake people make who want to be R+? I think it's expecting results like very, very quickly, especially with behavior modification. I think that can take a really much longer than what people, you know, want. You know, results can be, you can see results really quickly actually, but like, you know, you have to be really patient. And lack of management. I think management is like so underutilized and so underestimated as a way, because it's often seen as avoiding situations, but really management is really, really important. So I don't know if I tried to cover like all of those types of questions. Or yeah.
Yes, no, that was great. Dawn, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I think myself, Vallie, and lots of other people out there can feel like really like wanting to affect change, and I think sometimes it's similar to like some of what Vallie just said there is that sometimes that change is going to take a little bit longer than we'd like. And so I try to like adjust my thinking about influencing people, and an idea that works well for me is to think about, and I've thought about, you know, I've been on the wrong side of a number of arguments over the course of my life, and I've kind of come around, and I can say that now because I've kind of come around to see that I was wrong. And I think in my experience, my coming around, a major feature was that it took time, and that it took a bit of influence from a few different sources across that course of time, because I had to kind of digest it and almost come around to it as if it was my own sort of idea. You know, it didn't feel like I was like, oh, well, so-and-so said it and now I believe it. You know, I had to feel it and embody it before I could really actually feel that way about whatever the topic might have been. So I when it comes to how I try to train myself or calibrate myself to thinking about how I affect change, I like to think of the idea of just planting seeds. And that allows me to hopefully think of it as I'm just going to put some good information out there and hope that somebody latches onto it, but I'm also going to completely let go of any expectations to see any sort of results of my efforts because I'm unlikely to see it. You know, like it's just, and maybe I'm the first person to hit them with this bit of information. Maybe I'm the third or the fifth. Maybe I am that like 10th person and they're like, oh, you know what? I never got it, but the way you said it makes sense. And I can feel really cool about it, but I'm also capitalizing on like the other 9 experiences they've had prior to that. A lot of it for me feels like kind of letting go of the idea of actually like witnessing the change I'd love to see, and just trying to contribute to the overall conversation and hope that I'm planting some seeds and hoping that like with some time people are kind of gravitating towards these ideas. And that encourages me to try to, you know, be like thoughtful about my conduct and to like deliver like credible, useful information and do a good job of what I'm doing, even though all of that really great behavior is not going to be immediately reinforced in the way that I wish it would.
Yeah, thank you. That was so well put. I know we went over time again. But this is so great. Thank you both so much. At this point, I don't think we should take any more questions, but I will encourage everyone to follow both their accounts on Instagram and participate in their lives so you can get more of this great stuff. And I will send out the recording so you guys can go back and watch it later if you would like to, or share with friends that maybe you're hoping to influence.
I'm so curious about Steph's hand.
I know, Steph.
Oh, Steph, I didn't see. Oh no. Okay. Well, let's just do. We'll have to make this really quick. But if you guys don't mind, we'll just quickly do the one. Are you good?
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm sorry. It's totally fine if we don't get to talk about this, but I feel like I needed to raise my hand because it's hard a little bit to type it out in the chat. So, hi, I'm Steph. I'm from the Philippines. It's so nice to meet you, Doc Vallie and Dawn. I'm so starstruck. But anyway, the reason why I wanted to talk, raise my hand is because I'm really passionate about promoting and encouraging people here in the Philippines to train their dogs with positive reinforcement, reward-based methods and games and things that make their dogs happy. My experience so far is that some people have reached out who are interested in it, but I like you mentioned, Dawn, you don't get a lot of feedback. You don't see a lot of results after some time, after that initial chat, initial discussion. So I was wondering, like, are there any strategies like this is all application now. My question is applications. Like, how do I make that change? What other strategies can I do to help people ingrain it into their lives with their dogs? Because it could be like, it's fun, you know, it's an interesting topic, you know, they learn these new ideas in the first call, but then how do I encourage them to keep doing that every single day? Because like consistency is key. Is there like, do I need to do follow-ups? Is there a way to encourage them or see if they're making any progress? Just so I could like continue on with that philosophy and help people integrate it into their lives with their dogs. So I was just wondering if that's something I should think about, is that something that I should like leave it up to the dog guardians to do, or is there more I can do for them?
Reinforce them.
Yeah, yeah, totally reinforce them. And
Reinforce the crap out of them.
Make it easy. I like to try to, because buy-in, I think like early buy-in is really crucial. So sometimes in like a first session, it's like, hey, let's just like, I used to do this more often in the beginning. I think I was more concerned about this, but I would be like, hey, this is kind of unrelated, but like, let's learn how to do touch, you know, and just do like a simple behavior. Because as soon as people saw something go from scratch to something in like 5 minutes, they're like, oh, I understand how this works. And to me, that was just like a buy-in tactic. That was just me trying to convince them that at least this one little thing could happen right in front of their eyes, and that they would believe in it, and that would inspire ongoing effort. I also encourage people to, I'll tell people to do 3-minute sessions a day. You know, like the time that it takes your water to boil for like your coffee or something like that. Can you do like 12 touch reps? Or like I try to make it so damn easy, because I think what's successful is a consistent practice. And I think if you can get somebody doing that for like a week, 10 days, to like they start to see it, but they need that initial effort to see the returns. And then I think there also is, are you a dog trainer?
Working, like I have just started. I'm working for
certification. Like a client, like a client-based sort of question. Yeah. And I do think there's, I don't know how I do it. I think it's just my like constitution. Like I can also like let a few slide. I have clients who just invest heavily, practice, do all the research they want to know. And I have other clients who are like into it. And then I have others who are like just not, and I can't make them do it, you know? And so there's a weird little, it feels kind of sad to say it out loud in front of a bunch of people, but like, you know, it's sort of like you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink sort of thing, you know? And I think there's a little bit of this where my sanity and my like is saved, and my burnout is warded off by being able to like let a bit of it slide, because I just can't make everybody do everything I want them to do, even if it would be really great for their dog. So I try to make it easy, reinforce them, but also like accept that the reality is that like you're gonna have a huge influence on some people's lives and less so on other people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, you can't convince people if they're not ready to be there, right?
Yeah, make a good pitch, you know, a real good pitch.
And lead by example, you know, like if you are on social media, like give them your social media, like put videos. This is one thing that, you know, we're always criticized for, is not having enough videos of the way that we train our dogs. But because, you know, positive reinforcement training is so boring, like there's not dramatic, it's not, you know, like you don't see the like immediate change right away. And we're, you know, we look like cookie pushers and that's it. But like, you know, Instagram is now moving toward being a video-based like platform. I think they're just trying to be more like TikTok, but you know, having these little videos where you are showing how positive reinforcement works and how it's working with your dog, or, you know, reinforce clients for, you know, if they show you a video, like reinforce the crap out of them, being like, yeah, that's great. Like you did an amazing job. Like, you know, and if you have feedback, like sandwich it, right? Like you did great. This is what you could do next time, but great job, stuff like that. Right. So I think it's all about like being really kind and like, and, you know, and I think those tactics that Dawn said are amazing. Like just 3 minutes a day, like it's, you know, or 9 minutes a day, like that's nothing. Right. And showing those behaviors that dogs, like, you know, the touch is like so quick and dogs catch on like so quickly. And then people are like mind blown. Like, what? So I think those little kind of tactics are really, really good to kind of plant those seeds and make people, you know, more into it. And because they people love seeing their dogs get that aha moment. Like it blows their mind that you can get a clicker and a treat and a dog will do something that you've asked them to do. And they're really like, I think that's very reinforcing for people.
And in person, I'm like lavish with praise. Like I'm telling everybody, your mechanics are amazing. Let's tweak this little thing, but that's great timing on that one. Love that one. You're like, oh my, your dog is so like, wow, did you see how they did that? Like I really want to like, I don't avoid any opportunity. Like if anything remotely good happens, like they are hearing about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That is such a great question, and you're getting a lot of head nods in the chat. I think people really enjoyed this, and I have a sense we're all going to go look up clicker training classes after this. And I'll be clicking on the street like you, Vallie.
I am like, yeah, if I don't have my clicker, I'm like, yes, good boy. Like, he's just like lunging. I'm like, that's fine. Or go run away. Yeah, but yeah, especially
I feel like we need a video of that on your Instagram very soon.
There's so many good comments here. I've been seeing them like kind of flutter here and there, but I've been too distracted. I'm just scrolling back and it's like so many wonderful things people are saying, and it's great to hear people sharing their experience, and it's just, yeah, this is really great.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Of course, this was so much fun. I mean, this is a heavy topic, I feel, and you guys made it so fun and so engaging. So thank you so much for doing this. And thank you to all the participants. You know, we went over by 28 minutes, guys, and most of you hung around. So
yeah,
thank you for coming and giving your time and being so dedicated to your pets. It's wonderful to see all of you online. And oh, is that Husk?
Oh, there's the
hand. Beauty. He knows it. He knows he's handsome. Amy says the man crush. But I'll go ahead and close things out. But once again, thank you all for being here tonight. We will upload a recording probably in 48 hours, and I will send it out to everyone who signed up. So if you had to drop off, you will get a copy of this. I'll share your presenters information again as well. And of course, everyone is invited to join any of the public events that Petminded is putting on. Our fall calendar is coming out, I believe, next week. So hope to see you all again soon, and have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.